Okay, hello everyone. My name is Elena Martinez. I'm the technical manager for this session, DNDC Modeling, Effects of Climate Smart Agricultural Interventions on Greenhouse Gas Emissions. Thank you so much for taking part in ANH 2023. We look forward to a robust and interactive session today. So thank you so much. I'm now going to pass over to Professor Suresh Babu to start the session.
Thank you, Elena. This is wonderful to see a lot of people joining and registering and joining in this session, Learning Lab. And let me introduce myself, Suresh Babu, Senior Research Fellow and Head of Capacity Strengthening at the International Food Policy Research Institute based in Washington. And I basically oversee the role and implementation of capacity strengthening activities of IFPRI, but also conduct research on specific issues. Currently, my interests are in connecting climate change, resiliency, climate smart agriculture to food and nutrition outcomes. And in that context that we are bringing this learning lab to bridge the two groups of scientists, one working on food security and nutrition policies, on the other working on climate change, climate smart agriculture policies. And there is increasingly need for bringing these two groups together in terms of understanding what each other is doing to actually finally get to the objectives of not only achieving food security and nutrition goals, but also achieving the climate goals that we need to eventually get there, because sustainable agriculture, sustainable food system transformation, they all depend on how we deal with the climate change and related actions that we are going to be putting in on the ground, right? So from that context, if you're wondering why climate change related learning lab is coming into the agriculture for nutrition, health and health kind of academic sphere, this is the reason. So I just wanted to give you that perspective. And this is becoming more and more important because as we, on the one hand, get involved in climate change modeling, climate change related analysis, we tend to kind of lose track of food security and nutrition goals, and also goals related to how women are going to be impacted, how gendered impact is going to be on through the climate action that we are going to be doing, right? So from that perspective, on the one hand, food and nutrition policy analysts, food and nutrition scientists, understanding what it involves to understand the climate actions and how climate actions can actually help in mitigate and adapt for the food systems to transform. On the other hand, the climate scientists to understand what are the food security and nutrition goals and how they can work towards those goals while they are designing and implementing climate action. So this bringing these two sets of players, actors and players, policy analysts and policy decision makers is a kind of goal that we have set for ourselves. So as someone worked on both spheres of these activities, I thought that particularly my team, Mausumi, who is presenting, Rutvik, who will be joining, we thought that we should bring this. We have worked on both spheres and we wanted to bring these communities together. So with that broad introduction, I welcome once again all of you. And this is a basic introduction to the climate change modeling. We are only using one model that we have actually implemented, but there are several models that you can explore after this presentation, and whichever is convenient for you, whichever is useful for you, you can take on. But then what is the objective of this presentation is to give an introduction to the modeling of the climate change actions from a production perspective, food security, food systems perspective. And we will introduce that and we'll answer some questions and maybe we can discuss the data availability. This work has been going on for almost 2 years now among our team. So we have the pleasure of presenting it to you and also get your feedback on what do you think in terms of use of such models, in terms of understanding the implications of climate actions on food security and nutrition, and also to design climate actions with food security and nutrition in mind in terms of changing the cropping pattern, changing the particular agronomic practices within a cropping pattern, within the cropping system or within a crop production, and also to link that to changing environment, right? Changing temperature, changing water availability, and the implications for that for sustainable food production systems. So with that broad introduction, I will now turn it over to my colleague, Mausumi Bhattacharjee, who will be presenting and taking us through the systematic way of looking at this from a policy modeling perspective, and also we are going to be joining with Rutvik. He is going to be also joining us in an hour or so. He's not able to join in the beginning due to personal reasons, but he'll be joining and answer more questions and nitty-gritty issues related to data availability, data use, and so on. So with that, let me turn it over to Mausumi and sit back and relax and enjoy the presentation. Okay, thank you.
This is what the agenda looks like. We are going to talk about one of the climate modeling packages or exercises that is called the DNDC. And we are going to talk about the findings from one of the published papers, what work that we have been pursuing, and we will give you a flavor of the package DNDC. It's actually not a quite hands-on session because this is a very intensive training, and probably it should run into 3 or 4 days. But we'll still try to give you an exposure to the best extent possible. We will go through some site simulations, some regional simulation as the package looks like. So, and then we will have a short quiz. And after an hour or so, Rutvik should be able to join us, and he will walk us through more technical stuff. So the DNDC is denitrification and decomposition model, and it's a process-based computer simulation model of different chemical reactions of carbon and nitrogen biogeochemistry in agro ecosystems. And it's Lee 2003, Lee 2004 were one of the first papers, modeling exercises, empirical exercise simulation exercises that started off with this kind of research. And the DNDC can be used to model various kinds of parameters. So it can be plant growth, your soil carbon dynamics, what is the soil content, bulk density, etc., and emissions of gases like carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. So as Prof. Babu already mentioned, that we are trying to use this kind of application. So why do we need to know about DNDC? Is that we're trying to work on this paper on effects of climate smart agricultural interventions on greenhouse gas emissions, rice production in India. And we're trying to answer questions like, does different alternative farm management practices for rice fields, say, in India, have an impact on its agricultural climate footprint? So we try to estimate what is the global warming potential, or what is the amount of greenhouse gas emissions from different farm management practices, and whether shifting to one kind of farm management practices reduces the global warming potential, and we can reduce on our carbon footprint. And does a given alternative management approach have the same impact across the country? So these are the 2 key questions that we're trying to address in our India application of the DNDC model. Rutvik will be discussing in details the results of it. But right now, I'm going to take you through before going to technical details. And we have already shared all the materials, the dummy data sets and how to download the package, etc. So I will be coming to it in a short while. But before going to that, we just want to walk you through a paper, a published paper on using the DNDC model, just to see what happens actually. So that paper is field validation of the DNDC model for greenhouse gas emissions in East Asian cropping systems. So I'll go through the presentation now. So this particular paper on field validation of the DNDC model. So basically, cropping systems are human modified terrestrial ecosystems, and they act as either sources or sinks of greenhouse gases. Now, importance of this lowland rice fields as a source of atmospheric methane was discussed in the 80s. Nitrous oxide emissions from animal and crop production approximately account for 70% of annual global anthropogenic source of nitrous oxide, and it increases with an increasing use of fertilizers for our for the growing global population, feeding the global population. Now, there have been different approaches for estimating greenhouse gas emissions from cropping systems. The IPCC guidelines for national greenhouse gas inventories, which has emission factors for various categories of ecosystems. Surrogate parameters for estimating methane emissions from regional and or national rice fields. For example, this paper by Bachelet 95 assumed that methane emission is a constant fraction of net primary production or organic matter added to soil. But while all these kind of approaches have their own pros and cons, for example, this approach has a negative part that the effects of water regimes, rice cultivar, soil properties, etc., are not considered. There was something called a descent ecosystem model, which simulates soil organic carbon levels, crop yields, and annual trace gas fluxes for various soils. And this paper by Matthews 2000 does a process-based methane emissions from rice ecosystem MERES model for simulating methane emissions from rice fields. Cow et al. There's a methane emission model, again estimating methane emissions from rice fields in China. So there are these whole bunch of different approaches which are already there. Now, this particular model that we discussed was developed by Lee et al. Way back in 92-94, but the paper that we're discussing is a much more recent one. It was expanded to simulate nitrous oxide, methane, carbon dioxide, and ammonia emissions. Using this model, environmental impacts such as land use type, agricultural activities, mitigation options, trace gas emissions, all can be assessed in one holistic and a comprehensive manner. And applied to it is also applied to estimate nitrous oxide emissions from agricultural fields, dairy farms, methane emissions from rice fields, and soil organic carbon dynamics. There are these different versions which I already showed you in that paper on 20 years of DNDC modeling. So a forest version for simulating nitrous oxide emissions, N2 and NO emissions. And DNDC links ecological drivers, for example, climate, soil properties, vegetation, anthropogenic activities to soil environmental variables. These variables in turn control organic carbon and nitrogen transformation processes. Now the DNDC model can work in a site mode or in a regional mode. Now, in the model, if it works in the site mode, it simulates trace gas emissions at specific sites and can be compared against your particular field observation. And if it is working in the regional mode, then the latter estimates regional emissions of trace gases based on statistical uncertainty estimates. The constructions of the model and coefficients of the equation used for the model are all delineated in this paper by Lee 2000. So if you want to access any of these papers, please let us know. I can share it with you. Now, for this particular paper, for the Asian cropping systems, what was the objective? Was to assess the reliability of the DNDC model for cropping systems in several Asian countries. It is validated against field records of greenhouse gas emissions through a series of battery of sensitivity tests. Validation exercise was conceived as a follow-up activity of the compilation of a trace gas emission database for Asian cropping systems. And this was part of an Asia Pacific network for global change research project. So these are the different field locations in China, in Japan, and in Thailand. So map of East Asia with the location of validation sites, Mikasa, Tsukuba, Penshui, Nanjing, Yurong, Suzhou, Chongqing, Jingtan, Shansha, Guangzhou, Chiang Mai, Surin, Suphanburi, and Prachinburi. Now, I do not. I will not discuss all the what happened, what were the findings in each of these sites, but just to give a snapshot of the fields of or the characteristics of the field stations in Thailand, Japan, and China. So the authors report on the bulk density, the soil organic content, and the clay organic carbon content, and the clay percentages. What are the different cropping systems? So this is how you start off with this name of the location, with the different geographical parameters, the year in for which we refer to the field stations, and what were the different characteristics, soil characteristics. So this is one of the tables from the paper on observed and modeled seasonal methane emission rates from rice fields in China and Thailand. So the main thing that you have to do here is to see what is the difference between what you observe and what the final model estimates are. So that's the main ball game, and that's and how close you're able to achieve. Why is the difference coming in? Those are the agricultural perspectives that one has to understand and then go into policy making. Now, validation of the DNDC model for simulation of annual variations of seasonal N2O and methane emissions and management effects. What the authors find is that overall, the models and the field observations quite matched using the DNDC model, but just on the seasonal or annual emissions of methane, nitrous oxide, NO, the DNDC model did satisfactorily simulate N2O emissions from lowland soils. The relative deviation was less than 36%. And methane emissions from rice fields in China, the relative deviation was less than 33%. But the model did not simulate well nitrous oxide emissions from andesol in Japan and some rice fields in China, methane emissions from rice fields in Thailand, and nitrous oxide emissions from upland soils in Japan. So for these three cases, the model did not simulate well. So here, after you run the model, you can have these different plots just to check where is the actual observation, and where the model estimates lie. So you can keep on generating such tables. So we need to understand why does these two differences come up? Why does these differences between the observed and the model estimates come up? So the systematic discrepancies observed in some simulations is due to the insufficiency of some specific input data on soil properties and failure to simulate the dynamics of some variables. So one caveat is that the DNDC model was developed more for temperate climates, specifically in the US and China. So at times it fails to capture all the, even though we input all the required parameters, but some information is in the system inbuilt. So those parameters may or may not be able to change. And because of that, sometimes your estimates may differ. So that's one of the loopholes of the DNDC model, but still it's one of the best available ones. For example, from simulations, and also we may not have accurate data. So Ritvik is going to talk more about this, that we require accurate data about everything, anything, all parameters and inputs that we feed into the model. If there is deviation, then our results differ a lot. So, for example, from the simulations with the andesol in Japan, all of the fluxes of nitrogen gases simulated by DNDC were much higher than the observations. And this discrepancy was because of a default parameter, microbial biomass fraction of total soil organic carbon. So this is already fed into the system, and we can't change it. Because of it, the DNDC model estimates show that the nitrogen gas emissions are much higher. In DNDC, the fraction has been fixed to 0.02 based on the observations for most kind of soils. So the poor simulation of methane fluxes from rice fields in Thailand can be attributed to several reasons. The soils in Thailand have a low pH of 4 to 5, which theoretically produces very low fluxes of methane. So although DNDC simulates the changes in your soil acidity after flooding, the exact dynamics of the changes may not be captured. So with this, we have given you a brief exposure as to what kind of empirical exercises you can do with DNDC and how you can bring it into policy. So now we will move into actually what the DNDC model looks like and how to use the software. So this is what the framework, the pathways framework of the DNDC looks like. And the user manual that we have shared is freely available, publicly available, download anytime. It will walk you through all the different pathways, channels, or what steps you need to undertake. So what you see here in this model is there in the software. So what all steps you need to walk through are all outlined there. So the main ecological drivers are climate, soil, vegetation, and human activity. We have soil climate dynamics, we have the plant growth dynamics, we get to see how the decomposition happens. And then the soil environmental factors, temperature, moisture, the acidity, the redox, and the different substrates. So the process of denitrification, nitrification, and finally fermentation. And if you are interested, this is what nitrification and denitrification is actually all about. Or what gets broken down and finally through different steps to finally get to nitrogen. So these are the different chemical reactions you are interested in it. So that's also there. This is what this package looks like, and there are different versions of the package, and your data has to be formatted accordingly to input into the information. So these are the different site modes. If you click on it, this is the input information. So here you have to plug in information on climate, soil, on cropping, and finally you have to, after you do all the cropping, enter all the different information to finally save all your details. There's a region mode in which you can plug in all the different values, and there's an uncertainty analysis also. So this is what the package looks like. There are different versions which are there. The DNDC model consists of two components. The first component consists of soil, climate, crop growth, decomposition submodels, and this is used to predict the soil temperature, moisture, acidity, and redox potential. And the second component is made up of nitrification, denitrification, and fermentation submodels used to predict emissions of gases such as methane, carbon dioxide, ammonia, nitrous oxide, nitric oxide, and dinitrogen. So this is what this entire system is all about. Now, DNDC in the user mode. So for the model to run successfully, the user must provide accurate data on three categories: on climate, on soil, and on farming management. Now, the farming management category will require you to input information on the crop, the tillage pattern, fertilization, manure application, and flooding or irrigation. Yes, I already told you that there are two simulation modes for DNDC, the site mode and the regional mode. While the same type of input data is needed irrespective of the mode of the simulation, there's a difference in how the data is formatted and how it is finally inputted into the simulation. So this requires real hands-on exercises to understand how you will format the data. And actually, if you walk through the manual, you will see that there are different formatting ways that are there in the documented in the manual. So you can follow any one of them for different input scenarios. Now, first, the site mode. It is used to simulate carbon, nitrogen, biogeochemistry at a field level. The data needs to be inputted manually through the model's user interface, and this is the screen. This is the snapshot of the screen that you will get to see when you will enter the information. So in the site mode, on crop, tillage, fertilization, manure amendment, irrigation, flooding, plastic, grazing or cutting, you have to enter all these details on crop type, whether it's perennial crop or not, cover crop, if the cover crop, planting month, harvest mode, and the different crop parameters and biomass fractions, CAN ratio, annual nitrogen demand, etc., water demand. So you have to enter all these stuff. In the regional mode is used when the simulation is when we need to run the simulation at an aggregated level. A region can be anything from a district, state, or even a county, a province, but each region has to be divided into multiple grid cells. And the data for these grid cells have to be saved in different text files. Now, next, DNDC site mode. So what do we need to do for climate input? So the climate data required for site mode are latitude, daily atmospheric parameters like temperature, either minimum or maximum or average, then precipitation, solar radiation optional, wind speed optional, relative humidity is optional, nitrogen concentration in rainfall, atmospheric ammonia and carbon dioxide concentration. And the atmospheric parameters must be saved in an external CSV file. So this is a snapshot of what your screen will look like when you do the climate input. All your the different formatting steps that we are saying, and you have to open an input. It says if you once you've created the data in a particular format, you need to open this, and always remember to click accept. And finally, after you're done with climate, soil, and cropping, please save it. Otherwise, you lose out on all information. The DNDC site mode for soil input. So what are the kind of soil data that we need to use? Land use type. Options include upland crop field, paddy rice field, moist grassland, dry grassland, wetland, and tree plantation. Top soil texture, soil acidity, bulk density of topsoil, and clay fraction. So this is what the screen will look like. The snapshot of the package for soil. So all these different inputs you have to enter. Next is crop input. So some of the crop data required for site mode for each crop in a year: crop type, harvest and planting days, above ground crop residue fraction left after harvest. Crop parameters are automatically populated from the DNDC library, but they can be modified if you have the details for a specific crop that is being planted. Next is tillage data, tillage input. So number of tillage applications per year, date of each application, type of each tillage application. So it can be no-till, plowing slightly 5 centimeters, plowing with disc 10 centimeters, plowing with mold board 20 centimeters, deep plowing 30 centimeters. So the kind of tillage inputs that are required. For fertilization, the type is manual, auto fertilization, or fertigation. The following are applicable for manual and fertigation type: number of applications per year, date of application, application depth, and the applied amounts of fertilizer. Number of applications, the date of application, the application depth, and the applied amount. All these need to be fed in. Next is the DNDC site mode, manure amendment input. So the manure amendment data required for site mode is number of applications per year, the date of each application, the type of manure, include options like green manure, farmyard manure, compost, the amount applied, CN ratio, there's a default value which you can overwrite it, and what is the different kind of application methods you're having. Is it surface fade or spread, or is it incorporation? And finally, the last one on irrigation input is the irrigation events and irrigation index. Irrigation index fraction is if irrigation index is chosen, and the number of irrigation events, date, water application rate, and method of irrigation if irrigation event is selected. Flooding is only applicable for paddy, rice, or other wetland crops. For flooding, there are multiple options to provide the input data. So it can be irrigation, rain-fed, observed water table data, or empirical parameters. Now for irrigation, user provides data on the number of flooding events, date of the event, type of flooding, that is conventional versus marginal, and the water leaking rate. For rain-fed, it is watershed index is the only required input. It represents the ratio of the rainwater collection area to the area of the field. for observed water table data, the users, you need to upload daily water table measurements for the year. And empirical parameters, if actual water table data is not available, the DNDC model can predict the values using these hydrological parameters, that is initial water table depth, surface inflow fraction of precipitation, and runoff or outflow fraction. Plastic and grazing or grass cutting input. Plastic film is used to construct greenhouse gases or mulch the ground and can alter the temperature and moisture level of the soil and hence the plant growth. If plastic film is used on the field, the following data needs to be provided. So number of plastic film applications per year, the dates of application, and the fraction of soil covered by plastic film. And finally, on grasslands, for grasslands and pastures, the grazing and grass cutting might be practiced. The following parameters should be specified: grazing, number of grazing time period, dates of each time period, grazing hours per day, number of cattle for each grazing period. And for grass cutting, it is number of grass cuttings per year, date of each cutting, the cut per grain of fruit, leaves, stems, and or roots, and the cut fraction. So we have covered all the input dimensions that you need to enter into the model. And so just to user input on climate, small soil farming management, tillage, fertilization, manure, flooding, and irrigation. So we have walked you through all the different snapshots of the package that you will face, and you have the required data and the required format. So this is all that needs to be done.
See, one of the things that we are also experimenting with is how do we strengthen the national systems in different countries, right? To actually use this kind of models to have locality specific, context specific kind of designing of interventions for both mitigation and adaptation, right? That is becoming more and more important because there is this national policy, there is this nationally determined contributions, this NDCs, and we also have national adaptation plans. They're all there at the national level, right? See, what happens is that these plans have to be translated into climate action, and that is consistent with the food security and nutrition goals for one at least, and also other goals that you may have, gender inclusion, inclusivity of youth. You know, when you bring in all these goals, it becomes important that we do this modeling exercise in the context specific way, right? Because it's one thing to say, okay, this is rice growing area, so I'm going to go and do rice modeling, right? But also in a particular district, as we do this exercise, we found the districts differ in terms of their cropping pattern. They differ in terms of the agroecology. They differ in terms of the soil fertility level. They differ in terms of this water availability for changing the cropping pattern. So from that perspective, how can we use this model? In fact, even if you're not a modeler, if you can understand the results of this model and work with the modelers who are using this kind of model, it's also a good starting point, right? So that your goals in terms of food security and nutrition and other goals can be achieved as well. So in that context, like Mausami probably mentioned already, we welcome collaboration. We welcome if you are using this in one of your countries, either in Africa or Asia or Latin America, you let us know if you want to collaborate with us. We can also jointly work with you to develop this further as we go along, because this is not only a model that is available, but we can also explore other models as we go along jointly. But it's just an introduction for us in this learning lab. But we will bring this, like I said, the idea behind it is to enable more food and nutrition economists, food and nutrition policy analysts to also touch upon climate change related analytical tool, right? So they can incorporate their goals in the climate analysis. Okay, so just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Dr. Babu. First of all, hi everyone. Sorry for being late. Like Dr. Babu mentioned, I had a personal commitment. But yeah, during this last few minutes, I wanted to go over how to read the output files of a DNDC simulation, and how to interpret the results and all that. So, without further ado, we can get started. So again, I'll be covering this pretty quickly. It's just some details on how to interpret the output. So first of all, as Dr. Masumi has already mentioned, again, there are two types of simulation modes. One is the site mode, one is the regional mode. And obviously, we've discussed that. And the output depends on the type of output. The format of the output depends on the type of simulation you go through. So first we'll look at the site mode. So for the site mode, all of the output, once you run the simulation on the in the software itself, you'll get CSV files with the daily results, for every year you run the simulation for. So again, you'll get 8 different CSV files, and each file will contain information about the different components of the model. So, one of the files will contain information about water use by the cropping systems. One of the file, will contain information about the soil dynamics. Again, information about like the change in organic content, change in the nitrogen within the soil. Again, information on like these will be part of one of the files. And again, another file will contain information about the emissions, the gaseous emissions from the system. So yeah, that's what the format of these files are. Again, in addition to these 8 files, you'll also get like an annual report, like a summary of each year of that cropping system, or whichever cropping system you're simulating, you'll get a report for that year. So again, that would be a summary, which again you can use if you want to look at more aggregated data. So again, just going through this, again, the first thing we get from, so one of the 8 files is the climate output. Again, this just gives us information about, again, temperature, precipitation, all of this information we already provide into the model. When we run the model, we provide this input data, but some of these like evapotranspiration rates, these rates here, these are calculated by the model. Yeah, that's just the climate output. Again, not too interesting in terms of analytics. This can be interesting, especially if you're looking at, like the how the crop actually, grew throughout the time period. So again, this specific file will give you information about, the TDD. It will give you information about the biomass of the crop, of the stem, of the leaf, of the roots. And it also gives information about the water stress, daily water stress for the crop and the water demand. So again, this is information related to the crop. Again, we have information about the field management. Again, this is the third CSV file that you get when you run the site mode. This again contains information that we actually input. So again, whatever information we input about fertilizer use, again, that all is again given back to us by the model. Again, information about grazing, that's the 4th file. Soil climate output. This contains information about the soil parameters like soil moisture, soil oxygen, soil pH, redox potential of the soil. Again, if you're interested in doing an analysis on the soil parameters or how the soil dynamics work throughout the cropping system, this is something you might be interested in. Again, this is soil carbon. So this is where you get information about the emissions. So you have information about the methane emissions. You also have information about nitrogen emissions from the soil. So these files were the ones that we were interested in when we did our analysis, for the India use case. So again, because this is where you get the information about the actual emissions from the cropping system. So these were the ones where we, used to, run our analysis with, the different GHG scenarios and the GHG potentials, GWP potentials of different scenarios. And yeah, this is for about the water, everything about the precipitation, irrigation rates. Again, this, if you're interested in more about the hydrological aspects, this is something that's useful. And yeah, this is what the annual report will look like. Again, this summarizes everything that's already in the daily CSV files that you get for each day. Again, this is useful if you want to do a more aggregated analysis. So if we were to do a site-specific analysis instead of like a district level analysis, we would have used this annual report, because this, instead of giving you like a day-by-day results, which we weren't really interested in, we were just interested in the final result of the cropping system at the end. So, if we were to do a site-specific analysis, we would have used this as well. And again, this it contains the same information. Again, information about the outputs. If you see the CH4 emissions in a site specific analysis, in a site mode, minus means it's coming out of the system. So minus is the emissions, coming from the cropping system. So if soil CO2 emission is 444, that means 444 kilograms of carbon dioxide per hectare per year were released from that from that site. So again, this specific area were the one that we were focused on. And yeah, I think Dr. Mosuni already covered this part, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Mosuni, but yeah, this is the regional mode input. So I think she already covered that, but what we'll cover is the output. So again, this is for the regional mode. So the output again is somewhat similar in terms of what parameters you actually get from the or what data you get from the modeling from the simulation. It's just structured a little bit differently. So for any regional simulation, there are 4 different simulation options that you can do depending on your use case. So you can simulate for for each grid cell within a region. You can simulate the analysis with a combination of maximum soil parameter value, minimum soil parameter value, full irrigation, no irrigation. So that's when, again, this is used to, if you're like, if you're aware of like uncertainty analysis, so this is what happening here. So if the first option we have here, this is actually one of the best options because it takes into account the uncertainty. Like it takes a combination of maximum soil parameter value for that specific grid cell, and it also runs the simulation with the minimum soil parameter value. So it covers the whole range. So if you want to get the most accurate results, this is the one that you should use. And then again, there are like other options, but for our exercise, we ran this because we were interested in getting more accurate results. The only drawback with this option is that it takes a lot of computing resources, consumes a lot of computing resources, obviously, because you run the simulation 4 times. But we prioritize accuracy as well. So that's why we ran this specific simulation. So again, the output files, the regional mode, the simulation mode gives you one output file for each simulation run. So if we did 4 simulation runs, it will give you 4 different output files. And again, this format of the CSV file that that's given to you, it's kind of similar to the annual report that you see. Again, there's no daily results with the regional mode. There's only yearly results. So so it's similar to the annual report for the site mode. But the information contained is again really similar. Again, contains information about the nitrous oxide emissions and nitric oxide emissions, dinitrogen emissions, ammonia emissions. Again, if you saw here, methane emissions. Again, all of that information is also provided in the regional mode. It's just a slightly different format. So yeah, that was the regional mode output. And again, yeah, this is again, we just trying to reiterate the point, like how DNDC can be used in the context of climate modeling. Again, this has really, the DNDC model has a really good use case for any type of analysis. Like, you can do hydrological analysis, you can do like soil specific analysis. again, we use this for climate modeling. So we were interested in the carbon emissions, in the GHG emissions part of the output. So again, just to tie everything together, so our aim is to complete the simulation for all the districts in India, like that we showed in the study area that we discussed before. Again, the questions we're trying to answer is, using this simulation exercise is, do alternative farm management practices for rice fields in India, do they have an impact on the agricultural climate footprint? And does the same alternative management approach, does the same approach have different impacts across the country? So those are the questions that we're trying to answer. And ultimately, our goal is to inform, the farmers, at the ground level, to, just to tell them, which scenarios are best, in terms of the climate. So that's our goal. So as you saw, DNDC is a very, comprehensive simulation tool, and we can use it not just for climate modeling. We can also use it for, again, any other types of analysis as well. So that's the DNDC model. So again, if you have any questions about the output or just in general, please feel free to let us know. And thank you.
Thank you, Elena, for the opportunity. Thank you, Rutvik. Thank you, Mosami, and thanks, participants. Reach out to us if you want to have more questions and collaboration. We are open to that. Thank you so much.